Your own son hired me to kill you. Those were the words that froze my blood on a night I will never forget. I was standing in my kitchen, the clock striking midnight, when a shadow moved across the window. My instincts, though dulled by age, never fully left me. I grabbed the old service revolver I kept hidden in the cupboard, and that's when I heard it. His voice, calm, almost casual, delivering the unthinkable. I am Margaret Lawson. Most people just call me Maggie. I'm 75 years old, retired after decades as a homicide detective. I have faced killers, liars, and every kind of monster that walks this earth, but nothing prepared me for the night one of them came for me. Sent not by a stranger, not by an enemy, but by the people I raised, the people I once believed would protect me. At first, I thought it was a cruel mistake, some twisted joke. But then the man stepped closer, his breath carrying the stench of cigarettes, his eyes flat, merciless. Your son and his wife, they paid me well, but I don't kill women who look me in the eye. His words cut sharper than any knife. Imagine that. After giving my life to the badge, after sacrificing everything for my only child, it was my own blood plotting to bury me 6 feet under. If you're listening to this, I want you to think carefully. What would you do if the very people you loved the most turned into your executioners? Would you forgive them? Or would you fight back? Like, share and subscribe, because my story has only just begun. My name is Margaret Lawson, though everyone in this town has always known me as Maggie. 75 years sit heavy on my shoulders, but my mind is still sharp, sharper than most expect. I was once a homicide detective, a woman who spent her youth chasing killers through alleys, standing over blood-stained floors, piecing together puzzles others were too afraid to touch. My badge was more than a job. It was my identity, my armour. For decades, I stood against the darkness that tried to swallow the innocent. But time has a way of stripping us down. After my husband passed away from cancer 15 years ago, I left the force for good. The house we built together became my refuge, filled with memories of laughter, Sunday dinners, and the smell of his favourite cigar. It was supposed to be a safe place, a home where I could finally rest after a lifetime of war with crime. I have one son, David. He was the reason I sacrificed everything, my career, my nights, even my own happiness. I raised him alone after my husband's health began to fail. Every dollar I earned, every hour of overtime I worked, was for David's future. I told myself he would become the kind of man I had sworn to protect others from, honest, strong, unshakable. When he graduated college, I thought all the nights of chasing murderers had been worth it. I thought my life's purpose was fulfilled. When David married Emily, I welcomed her with open arms. She was charming, soft-spoken, and always smiled as if she had nothing to hide. I wanted to believe she was the partner who would steady my son, a woman who would build a family with him the way I once had. For years, I held on to that hope. I cooked them meals, babysat their children when they needed rest, and offered the wisdom only age can give. I thought we were bound by love, by loyalty, yet behind their polite gestures, something colder lingered. I remember the way Emily's eyes flickered when I spoke of the house. I remember David's hesitation when I asked if he was happy in his career. The instincts of a detective never truly fade, and mine told me something was wrong. Still, I silenced that voice. I wanted to be a mother, not an investigator. I wanted to believe my son was incapable of betrayal. This house holds my life story. The photos on the walls show David as a boy with scraped knees and wide, trusting eyes. The medals tucked in drawers remind me of battles fought and won. The rocking chair on the porch is where I dreamed of growing old, surrounded by family. Each object, each corner, carries pieces of me. My victories, my sacrifices, my grief. Losing it would mean losing myself. I am not a fragile old woman, though age has bent my back and slowed my steps. I still wake before dawn, brew my coffee strong, and keep my revolver polished, just in case the world forgets who I used to be. Neighbours see me as a relic, the old cop who tells too many stories. They don't know that behind my quiet routines lies a fire that refuses to burn out. So when I tell you my son and his wife plotted against me, understand this. I am not just any mother. I am not a victim waiting to be buried. I have seen killers stare me down, and I have stared back without blinking. And yet nothing, no gang member, no criminal, no murderer has ever cut me as deeply as knowing my own flesh and blood wished me dead. This is who I am, Margaret Lawson, a mother, a widow, a detective, and now a target. When I close my eyes, I can still see the days when life seemed almost ordinary, almost gentle. Before betrayal, before whispered threats in the dark, there were mornings filled with sunshine pouring into the kitchen, the smell of pancakes sizzling on the stove, and the sound of David's laughter echoing through the hallway. He was my little boy, my reason to push through nights of blood and crime scenes. I remember one case vividly, long before David was grown. I came home after working 72 hours straight, chasing down a killer who had left half the city in fear. My body ached, my mind was frayed, but when I walked into the house, I found David asleep on the couch, holding the picture I had given him of me in uniform. A tiny smile tugged at his lips, even in sleep. I sat beside him, brushed his hair back, and thought, this is why I fight. This is why I endure. Sacrifice was second nature to me. Birthdays missed, school recitals I couldn't attend, dinners that went cold waiting for me. I carried guilt for all of it. But I believed my absence was not neglect, it was protection. I was carving out a safer world for him. And when I did make it home in time, I tried to fill every moment with love. I took him fishing at the lake near our house, taught him how to ride a bike, showed him how to defend himself. Never start a fight, I told him, but never let anyone take what is yours. Those were the lessons I thought would guide him toward being a good man. As for Emily, in those early years, she seemed like the daughter I never had. She would visit me on Sundays with a pie in her hands and kindness in her voice. We'd sit on the porch, sipping iced tea, sharing stories about the little things, her job at the law firm, David's stubbornness when it came to chores, the way the world seemed to move faster every year. I allowed myself to believe that the sacrifices of my past had bought me this peace, this family. There were holidays that still glow in my memory. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered like confetti across the living room. Thanksgiving dinners where I carved the turkey while David cracked jokes that made Emily laugh until her eyes watered. On those days, I felt complete. My husband had long since been taken from me, but in my son and his new family, I thought I had found continuity, a future worth holding on to. The badge had hardened me, but motherhood softened the edges. I gave David every ounce of my heart. When he struggled with his first business venture, I emptied my savings to help him. When he called me in the middle of the night, panicked over debts, I reassured him, told him we'd get through it together. That's what family meant to me, standing by one another, no matter how dark the storm. Maybe that was my greatest flaw. Maybe love blinded me more than any criminal ever could, because for every warm memory, every smile, every shared meal, there were cracks forming that I refused to see. Still, when I think of the past, I cannot deny those golden moments. They were real. They were mine. Even now, sitting in the silence of this house, I replay those memories like old films. David running down the hallway in his pajamas, calling, "Mom, look what I drew!" Emily handing me a cup of tea, saying, "You're the strongest woman I know." I cherished those words, those images. They kept me alive when grief and loneliness threatened to consume me. And so the betrayal cuts deeper, not because I was naive, but because I once had such faith in them. I had believed with all my heart that I had given David the best parts of me, that all my years of sacrifice had built a man who would never raise a hand or a weapon against his mother. The truth, as I would later discover, is that even the purest memories can become weapons when twisted by greed. But for now, let me linger a moment longer in those happier times because they remind me of what I once fought for and of what I stand to lose. It began with whispers, the kind you almost dismiss, the kind you tell yourself are born from paranoia or fatigue. But I was a detective for too many years to ignore patterns, and the patterns were there, woven into the silences, hidden in the spaces between words. Emily's voice was the first sign. One evening, as I walked into the living room carrying a tray of tea, I heard her murmur to David, "If things were simpler, we could move forward faster." Her tone was hushed, her eyes darting toward the hallway when she realized I was near. The smile she gave me was too polished, too rehearsed. I set the tray down, my hands steady, though inside my stomach tightened like a knot. David brushed it off. "Just work stuff, Mom," he said quickly, his grin stretched thin. I wanted to believe him, and yet the instinct I had relied on for decades whispered otherwise. In the Force, we used to say, people rarely lie with their eyes. His eyes avoided mine that night. After that, the small fractures widened. Emily began making comments that slid beneath my skin like cold blades. "This house is so big for just one person," she said one morning, running her fingers along the banister as if measuring it. "Imagine what a young family could do here." Her words were framed as casual observations, but I heard the edge in them. A house is not just bricks and wood. It is history, sacrifice, memory. My husband built the porch with his bare hands. I raised David within these walls. To Emily, it seemed the house was not a home, but an asset. Then came the distance from David. He stopped calling me the way he used to. Our dinners together became infrequent, always with an excuse, a late meeting, a business trip, exhaustion. When he did appear, he seemed distracted, as if his thoughts were chained elsewhere. He fiddled with his phone more than he looked at me. And when I pressed him gently, he bristled, snapping, "Mom, you worry too much. Let me handle my life." I tried to silence the doubts, but Emily's behaviour grew bolder. She started locking conversations when I entered the room, her laughter cutting short the moment I stepped through the doorway. Once I caught her on the phone in the kitchen. She froze when she saw me, then pressed the call to an abrupt end. "Just a friend," she claimed. Her voice trembled, betraying her. The words that stayed with me most came one late afternoon when sunlight streamed across the living room. I was knitting on the couch when Emily sat opposite me. She studied me with a strange calm, her hands folded neatly on her lap. "It must be lonely being here without your husband," she said softly. Then, leaning forward, she added, "Sometimes, Maggie, people hold on too long to things they can't take with them." Her smile was thin, almost sympathetic, but her meaning was sharp as a knife. I looked at her for a long time, letting the silence hang heavy. She blinked first, glanced away, and that was when I knew. There was no kindness in her words. Only calculation. The tension seeped into every interaction. Even neighbours began to notice. Dr. Sarah, my friend across the street, once remarked, "Your daughter-in-law seems restless." She didn't elaborate, but the hesitation in her voice told me she sensed something amiss too. Still, I doubted myself. Perhaps I was imagining it, a relic of my years chasing shadows and criminals. But then, one night, I overheard the sentence that made my blood run cold. I had risen to get a glass of water when I passed by David's study. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, I heard Emily's sharp whisper, "She won't be around forever, David. Why wait? The sooner it's done, the better." I froze. My hand clutched the doorknob, but I didn't enter. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. The words replayed in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. The sooner it's done, the better. I stepped back quietly, forcing myself to remain calm. Bursting in would yield nothing but denials. Instead, I retreated to my bedroom, sitting in the dark until dawn broke, my revolver resting in my lap. For the first time in years, I felt the old fear, the kind I used to see in victims before they realised death was coming for them. But this time, I wasn't just a detective. I was the target. From that day, I began watching more carefully. I noticed Emily's growing impatience when I discussed repairs for the house, as if every dollar spent on maintenance was an affront to her plans. I saw David signing documents late at night, his hands trembling as he scrawled his name. I found empty bottles of expensive whiskey in the trash, signs of stress he refused to admit. I tested them too. One afternoon, I casually mentioned to Emily that I was considering leaving the house to a charity in my will. Her face stiffened, and for a fraction of a second hatred flared in her eyes. She caught herself quickly, laughing it off, saying, "Oh, I'm sure David will take care of you." But I saw it, the mask slipping, the truth bleeding through. Even the way they treated me shifted. There was less warmth, less pretense of affection. They no longer asked how I was feeling or if I needed groceries. Instead, they monitored my routines, asking when I'd be home, when I planned to visit friends. Questions that sounded like concern but felt like surveillance. A mother's love is powerful, but not blind. Piece by piece, I was forced to admit the possibility that my son and his wife were not just drifting away from me. They were planning something darker. The signs screamed louder with each passing day. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself it couldn't be true. Not David, not my own flesh and blood. But in my heart I knew, my instincts whispered the truth, a truth I wasn't ready to face. I was living with enemies disguised as family, and the storm was only beginning to rise. The breaking point came on a damp Thursday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the bills spread before me, the kind of ordinary chore that still gave me a sense of control. Numbers never lie. They reveal patterns, truths others want to bury. I had kept every receipt, every bank statement, every pension slip since my husband died. My years as a detective taught me that paper trails speak louder than words. I wasn't looking for trouble that night. I was simply balancing my accounts, making sure my modest pension and savings stretched as far as possible. But as I combed through the bank statements, discrepancies began to surface. Withdrawals I hadn't made, transfers I didn't authorise. At first I thought perhaps I'd forgotten. Old age, after all, has a way of making us doubt ourselves. Yet the amounts were too large, too frequent, too deliberate. $10,000 gone in 1 month, another 5 in the next. The ledger stared back at me like a silent accuser. And the destination of the money? Accounts tied to David's business ventures, listed under shell companies I didn't recognise. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. It was fury. I stacked the papers neatly, creating the kind of evidence file I'd once prepared for courtrooms. I knew exactly what I was looking at. Theft, betrayal, the first step in a larger plan. The next morning, I confronted David gently, testing his reaction. "I was reviewing my accounts," I said, sipping coffee as if it were a casual observation. "Some money seems to be missing." He froze for half a second before forcing a smile. "Don't worry about it, Mom. I moved some funds temporarily. Just a business matter. I'll put it back." "Without asking me?" I pressed. My eyes met his, steady and unblinking. His jaw tightened. "You're overthinking. Trust me." But I had trusted him all my life, and here was the truth, written in black and white. He had reached into the pockets of the woman who raised him, the one who sacrificed everything. That night, I pulled out every document I owned, title deeds, insurance forms, even my will, and began cataloguing them like I was preparing for an investigation. That's when I noticed something worse. The deed to my house had been tampered with. Photocopies showed a draft transfer, my signature crudely forged at the bottom. It wasn't filed yet, but the intention was there. My stomach dropped. They weren't just bleeding me dry with withdrawals. They were preparing to take everything, legally or not. The memories of Emily's words came rushing back. Sometimes people hold on too long to things they can't take with them. The veiled threats, the sudden distance, the careful questions about my routines, it all converged into a chilling picture. I decided to test her again. The following Sunday, as we sat around the dining table, I mentioned casually, "I met with an old colleague from the department. He reminded me to update my will. I was thinking of leaving the house to a veterans charity." The fork in Emily's hand clattered against her plate. For a split second, her mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed tight. Then she forced a laugh. "Oh, Maggie, you're always so dramatic. I'm sure David will make sure everything's handled properly when the time comes." When the time comes. The phrase chilled me. It wasn't the future tense of natural death. It sounded like a countdown. The following week, more evidence piled up. A credit card statement arrived showing charges for hotel rooms, luxury dinners and flights, none of which belonged to me. I traced them back to David's name. He was living a double life, one that bled money faster than he could control. I kept my findings hidden, tucking the documents into a locked drawer in my bedroom. Old habits returned. I logged times, dates, amounts, every suspicious comment. The file grew thicker by the day, a silent record of the storm brewing within my own family. Then came the most damning discovery. One afternoon, while David and Emily were out, I entered his study. The door was unlocked, the desk cluttered with papers. At first I only meant to glance, but then I saw it. A folder marked property transfer. Inside were drafts of legal documents, correspondence with a lawyer, even calculations of the property's value. In the margins, in David's own handwriting, were notes like, "After liquidate quickly" and "No delays once signed." But the most chilling piece lay beneath the pile. A napkin with scribbled numbers, payments, dates, and one line that read, "Victor, paid in full." My breath caught. Victor. The name meant nothing to me then, but it carried the weight of finality. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about erasing me completely. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, careful not to leave a trace. Then I sat in my room that night, staring at the file I'd built. My mind raced with questions. How long had they been planning this? Did David push Emily, or did Emily push David? Did my son truly want me gone, or was he a coward swept into her schemes? For the first time in my life, I felt torn between two roles, the detective and the mother. The detective wanted to act, to bring evidence to Robert Hayes, to let the law do its work. The mother wanted to cling to hope, to believe her son could still come back from the edge. But every ledger entry, every forged signature, every whispered word told me otherwise. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan already in motion. I slept with my revolver on the nightstand again, just like in the old days. And as I drifted into restless dreams, one thought repeated in my head. My son isn't just stealing from me, he's preparing to bury me. The evidence was undeniable. The only question left was how far they were willing to go and how far I would go to stop them. The demands began like raindrops, subtle at first, then relentless until they became a storm threatening to drown me. It was a Sunday dinner, one of those traditions I had insisted we keep. Even when David and Emily arrived late, their faces tight with unspoken tension. The roast sat cooling on the table while they exchanged glances, whispering behind the clink of wine glasses. Finally, David cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, his voice too casual, "have you thought about simplifying things?" "Simplifying?" I asked, cutting into the meat with deliberate calm. "The house," Emily interjected smoothly, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "It's too much for you, Maggie. Maintaining it, paying taxes, handling repairs, it's a burden. Wouldn't it be easier to just transfer ownership to us? We could handle everything for you." I set the knife down and looked at them both. Their smiles were masks, stretched thin, hiding hunger underneath. This house isn't a burden," I said quietly. "It's my life. It's where your father and I built everything. It's where I raised you, David." David's jaw tightened. "I'm not saying give it up completely. Just let us take the responsibility. Legally." The word legally hit like a hammer. I had already seen the forged drafts, the notes in his study. They weren't asking. They were maneuvering. In the following weeks, their persistence grew sharper. Emily began leaving pamphlets for retirement homes on the counter, as if by accident. David brought up financial worries over every meal. "You don't need to worry about bills anymore," he said one night. "If the house was in my name, I could refinance, cover expenses, make sure you're comfortable." "I am comfortable," I answered firmly. Emily leaned forward, her tone saccharine. "But think of the stress, Maggie. What if something happens to you suddenly? Wouldn't it be better to settle things now while you can?" Their words carried the weight of inevitability, as if my death was no longer an abstract future but a line item in their plans. One evening, David arrived alone. He paced the living room, agitated, his tie loosened, his face flushed from drink. "Mom," he said, almost pleading, "sign the papers, please. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The debts, the creditors, they're circling like sharks. If I don't get liquidity soon, I'll lose everything." I studied him, my son, the boy I had carried in my arms, now trembling before me like a man cornered. "And you'd take it from me?" I asked softly. His eyes flickered with guilt, but he said nothing. Silence can be louder than confession. The pressure escalated from persuasion to control. My pension card disappeared from my wallet one morning. When I confronted Emily, she shrugged. "You probably misplaced it. Don't worry, we'll handle your expenses." Handle my expenses. The phrase burned. I checked my accounts that evening, withdrawals made without my consent, my independence being chipped away piece by piece. Soon after, Emily began questioning my routines. "You really shouldn't go out alone, Maggie," she said sweetly. "What if you fall? Maybe you should let us arrange your errands." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't concern, it was surveillance. They weren't caring for me, they were corralling me, tightening the cage around my life. I tried to resist quietly. I hid cash in envelopes tucked into old detective novels on my shelves. I made copies of important documents and placed them in a safe deposit box at the bank, careful not to leave a trace. Each act of resistance was a reminder. I was not helpless, not yet. The confrontations grew louder. One night, David slammed his fist against the dining table, rattling the dishes. "Why are you being so stubborn? You don't need this house. You don't need all this money. You don't even spend it." My voice was steady, though my heart broke. "Because it's mine, David. Mine to decide, not yours to take." Emily's lips curved into a cold smile. "Stubbornness can be dangerous at your age, Maggie. People who don't adapt get left behind." I looked at her, my eyes narrowing. "Is that a threat?" She laughed lightly, brushing it off, but the air grew heavier, thick with unspoken menace. In the quiet hours of the night, I replayed these moments over and over, searching for cracks in their facade, searching for some sign that I was wrong. But each day confirmed it. Their demands weren't about helping me. They were about erasing me. The ledger of betrayal kept growing. A car insurance notice addressed to David arrived in my mailbox, tied to my address. A neighbour mentioned seeing Emily meeting with a realtor in town. A repairman showed up, claiming David had authorised an inspection of the house. Piece by piece, they were moving forward, as if I were already gone. The cruelest moment came when David, in a rare moment of candour, muttered, "You don't understand, Mom. You're in the way." I felt those words like a blade. In the way. Not a mother, not a woman, not a person, but an obstacle. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than any case I'd ever solved. I had faced killers with less malice than what I saw in Emily's smile, in David's desperation. Yet even as the storm closed in, a fire lit within me. I had been underestimated before, by criminals who thought a woman couldn't catch them, by men who thought age dulled my instincts. They were wrong then, and my son and his wife would learn they were wrong now. They wanted everything. They demanded I surrender my home, my dignity, my freedom. But I had spent a lifetime standing against predators. I wasn't about to bow to predators born from my own blood. The demands would keep coming, sharper, harsher, and I would keep resisting, one quiet act of defiance at a time. Because while they thought they were closing in on their prize, I was already preparing for the fight of my life. It started with the small invasions, the kind that seem harmless until they pile into something suffocating. My mailbox no longer brought my bills. When I asked, David said, "We thought it'd be easier if everything came to our address. That way we can manage things for you." He said it with a grin, but the grin was too tight, too forced. I told him no, but the bills still stopped coming. Soon, Emily began appearing uninvited in my kitchen, opening cupboards, checking the refrigerator. "You don't eat enough," she remarked one morning, holding up a half-empty carton of milk. "It's not healthy for a woman your age. We'll do your shopping from now on." I stared at her, my patience thinning. I've fed myself for 75 years. I think I can manage another week. Her lips curved, a mocking smile. "We're just trying to help." But help was the last thing it felt like. It felt like surveillance, like they were taking inventory of my life. My pension card disappeared next. When I demanded answers, David insisted, "Relax, Mom. I've got the card safe. You don't need to worry about paying for anything." "That's not your decision," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. His eyes hardened, the mask slipping. "You should be grateful," he muttered. "We're taking care of you." Grateful. As if stripping me of control was some sort of gift. The phone calls became another leash. If I left the house without telling them, my cell would buzz endlessly. "Where are you, Maggie?" Emily's voice would echo down the line, smooth but insistent. "You shouldn't be walking around alone. What if something happens?" One afternoon, I returned from visiting Sarah across the street to find David waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "You can't just wander off," he barked. "You scared us." I raised an eyebrow. "Scared you?" "I crossed the street, not the ocean." His face darkened. "You need to start being reasonable. You're not in charge anymore." Not in charge. The words lodged in me like a bullet. The invasions grew bolder. I woke one morning to find a locksmith working at my front door. "David asked me to change the locks," he explained casually. I stopped him, fury burning in my chest. "This is my house. No one changes a thing without my permission." That evening, David arrived with Emily at his side. His voice was cold. "Mom, you're being paranoid." "We're just making sure the place is secure." "Secure for who?" I demanded. "For me or for you?" Emily placed a hand on David's arm, her voice syrupy. "You're overreacting, Maggie. You should rest more. Stress isn't good for you." I felt the weight of their words pressing down, trying to paint me as frail, incompetent, incapable. They weren't just invading my privacy, they were rewriting my identity, turning me into a helpless old woman in need of guardianship. But I knew the tactic. I had seen it before in abusers who broke down their victims step by step until there was nothing left but dependence. They thought age made me blind, that love made me weak. They forgot I had spent my life watching predators work. I began keeping a hidden notebook. Every withdrawal, every lost document, every incident went into that book. If they wanted to erase me, they would first have to erase the truth I was recording. Still, the pressure was relentless. David started bringing up power of attorney. It's just paperwork, Mom. In case of emergencies, everyone does it. No, I said firmly. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the house. Why do you always have to fight me? Don't you trust me? Trust. Once it had been the foundation of our bond. Now it was a weapon he wielded against me. The night that truly broke through my denial came when I walked into the living room and for Emily going through my desk drawers. She looked up, startled, but quickly masked it with a smile. I was just looking for stamps, she said lightly. I glanced at the drawer she had open. It held my will. Find any? I asked, my voice dry as dust. She laughed, too high-pitched, and slipped past me out of the room. That night, I double-locked my bedroom door and slid the revolver under my pillow. For the first time since retirement, I felt like a suspect in my own home, forced to guard against enemies who wore the faces of family. The following days brought new humiliations. Emily cancelled my doctor's appointment without telling me, rescheduling it under her name. David forgot to drive me to the bank, insisting he'd handle withdrawals himself. I watched them take slices of my life, carving away my freedom, my privacy, my independence. They weren't content with my money. They wanted my mind, my dignity, my autonomy. But they underestimated one thing. I was not broken yet. Each attempt to control me only sharpened my resolve. I made copies of my hidden notebook, stashing them with Sarah, trusting her more than I trusted my own son. I began setting small traps, misplacing harmless papers, leaving them in plain sight, just to see how quickly they vanished. Every time the proof of their meddling grew stronger. They believed they were tightening the leash. In truth, they were giving me a trail, a case file against them, piece by piece. The walls of my life were closing in, but I had been in tighter corners. And predators always make one mistake. They think their prey is powerless. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. Not ever. The confrontation I had been dreading finally arrived. It was late evening, rain streaking down the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. The house was dim, except for the lamp on the dining table. I was sipping lukewarm tea when David and Emily walked in together, their footsteps heavy, their faces carved with tension. David didn't bother with small talk. He dropped a folder onto the table, papers spilling out. "Mom," he said, voice clipped, "we need to finalise this tonight." I glanced at the folder. Deeds, transfer papers, power of attorney documents, the kind of forms I'd seen criminals shove in front of desperate victims. Emily slid into the chair opposite me, her smile practised. "It's really for your own good, Maggie. Once everything is settled, you'll be free of stress. David and I will handle the hard parts. You can just enjoy your time." I looked at her evenly. Enjoy my time? By signing away everything I've worked for? By pretending I'm a guest in my own house? David's fist clenched on the table. "You're being unreasonable. Do you know how hard I'm working? Do you know what I'm risking to keep us afloat?" My voice was quiet but sharp. "And do you know what you're risking by pushing me like this?" His jaw tightened, but Emily leaned forward, her tone turning colder. "Maggie, you're 75. It's time to face reality. You can't manage finances, you can't keep up with the property, and frankly, you're becoming a liability. These papers will fix all that." "A liability," I repeated softly, letting the word hang in the air like a blade. "That's what you see when you look at me. Not a mother, not the woman who raised David alone, just a liability." Emily didn't flinch. Her eyes gleamed with something close to victory. "If you don't sign, the courts will decide for you eventually. Why fight us?" I leaned back, studying them both, and for a moment the silence was heavier than thunder. Then I pushed the papers back across the table. "No." David's face flushed red, his composure cracking. "Damn it, Mom. Stop being so stubborn. Do you think this is a choice? Do you think you can just sit here with your memories and your pride while everything falls apart around me? Everything is falling apart because of you. I shot back, my voice sharp as steel. Your debts, your lies. Don't you dare pin that on me. His eyes burned, but beneath the anger I saw fear, the kind of fear that makes men dangerous. Emily touched his arm, steadying him, then looked at me with a chilling calm. If you won't cooperate, we'll find another way. We always do. That was when I realised the time for subtlety had ended. This wasn't persuasion anymore. This was coercion, the kind that creeps toward violence. I stood, my voice steady. Listen to me carefully. I spent 30 years as a homicide detective. I've looked into the eyes of killers who thought they could intimidate me. You're no different. You want to take what's mine? You'll have to go through me first. David stared, breathing hard, torn between rage and shame. Emily's smile never wavered. Threats, Maggie? She asked smoothly. That doesn't sound like the loving mother everyone thinks you are. Not threats, I said. Truth. The standoff ended with silence, but the damage was done. From that night forward, the mask between us was gone. The next day, I received a letter from a law firm, David's lawyer, informing me of a petition for guardianship. They were trying to paint me as incompetent, incapable of handling my own affairs. It was a tactic I had seen before, used against the vulnerable. Now it was being used against me. I stormed into David's office, slamming the letter onto his desk. Guardianship? I demanded. You're trying to strip me of my rights through the courts? He looked away, shame flickering for just a second before he masked it with anger. It's for your protection, Mom. You're not thinking clearly anymore. I'm thinking more clearly than you ever have, I spat. And I know exactly what this is, theft wrapped in legal paper. His voice cracked under the weight of his frustration. I don't have a choice. You always have a choice, I said softly. You just don't like the honest ones. The tension escalated further when I discovered Emily rifling through my bedroom drawers. This time, I didn't stay silent. I caught her wrist, my grip stronger than she expected. What do you think you're doing? I asked coldly. Her smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. Looking for the spare keys. You really should trust us more. I trust you exactly as much as you deserve, I replied, releasing her wrist. Which is not at all. She straightened her blouse, eyes narrowing. You can make this easy or hard, Maggie. Either way, it ends the same. The air between us was thick with unspoken menace. For the first time, I saw not just calculation in her gaze, but malice. I went to Detective Hayes that week, file in hand. He listened carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with every piece of evidence I laid before him. Withdrawals, forged signatures, the guardianship petition. You've built quite a case, he said gravely. But you need to be careful. People under financial pressure, they get desperate. They don't stop at paperwork. His warning rang in my ears as I left the station. Desperate people are dangerous, and my son was more desperate than I had ever seen him. Back home, the house felt different. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow in the corner felt like a reminder that I was no longer safe within my own walls. I slept with my revolver close, the old instincts of survival humming through my veins. They had tried persuasion, manipulation, legal pressure. What came next, I feared, would be something darker. And I knew I had to be ready. Because when blood turns against you, the line between family and enemy vanishes. And in my house, the war had already begun. It happened on a night when the air felt heavier than usual, the kind of night that carries secrets in its silence. I'd been waiting, watching, documenting every move like I used to on stakeouts. For weeks, I had gathered fragments. Missing funds, forged documents, whispered threats. But fragments aren't enough. To stop them, I needed undeniable proof. That night, I found it. I was in the living room, lights dimmed, pretending to doze in my chair. My hearing isn't what it once was, but every creak of this house still speaks to me. I heard the faint click of the back door opening. I remained still, my breathing steady, letting them think I was asleep. The footsteps were light, cautious, but the rhythm was unfamiliar. Not David's heavy tread, not Emily's sharp heels. Someone else. A man's voice, low and coarse, drifted through the hall. She's in the living room? Then David's voice answered, hushed and urgent. Yes, keep it quiet, no mistakes. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my eyes closed, forcing calm, listening. Emily's whisper followed. It has to look natural. No blood, no struggle, quick and clean. The sound of a gun being checked, the metallic snap of a chamber loaded, sliced through the silence. I opened my eyes slowly, careful not to move. Through the crack of light from the hallway, I saw him. The man from the napkin scribble. Victor Ramirez, stocky, tattooed, a predator in human skin. And behind him, my son and his wife, their faces drawn with resolve and greed. The weight of it struck me like a hammer. My suspicions, my fears, they weren't just paranoia. My own child had brought a killer into my home. I rose silently, gripping the revolver I had tucked beneath the blanket on my lap. My voice cut through the air like steel. Don't take another step. Victor froze, his gun halfway raised. David's head snapped toward me, his face draining of colour. Mom, shut up, I snapped. My eyes never left Victor. Put it down. Now. For a long moment the room was a standoff. The killer smirked, tilting his head. Lady, you're tougher than they said. I was a cop before you were born, I said coldly. I've stared down men with more brains and more bullets than you. Drop it. He chuckled, lowering the gun slightly, but his eyes flicked to David. She's good. Real good. Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp. Do it, Victor. She's bluffing. I shifted the revolver's barrel toward her. Try me. The tension cracked when Victor shrugged, slipping his weapon back into his jacket. I don't kill women who look me in the eye, he muttered. Deal's off. And just like that, he turned and walked out, leaving my son and his wife standing there, stunned. The silence that followed was worse than the threat itself. David's face twisted with desperation, Emily's with fury. You plan to kill me? I said quietly, my voice trembling not with fear but with rage. Your own mother, after everything I gave you, David stammered. Mom, it's not what you think. Not what I think. My voice rose, shaking the walls. I heard you. I saw you. You paid him. You wanted me dead so you could take this house, my savings, my life. Emily's mask shattered. You should have just signed the papers. You made it harder than it needed to be. Harder than it needed to be, as if my life were an inconvenience to be tidied up. David reached out, his voice breaking. I didn't want this, Mom. Emily pushed me. I turned my revolver toward him, my hand steady despite the tears burning in my eyes. Don't you dare blame her. You let it happen. You brought him here. You betrayed me. The weight of 30 years in homicide pressed down on me, the thousands of victims I had sworn to protect flashing through my mind. I had faced monsters, but never did I think I'd find one in my own blood. I raised you to be better than this, I whispered, and you chose greed over your own mother. For a moment, David's face crumbled, guilt flickering across his features, but then Emily's voice cut through, cold and venomous. She won't go to the police. She won't destroy her son. I lowered the revolver slightly, not out of mercy but calculation. You think I won't? You think blood makes you untouchable? I pulled a folder from under the table, slamming it down. Copies of the ledger, the bank statements, the forged deeds. I've built my case. Every move you made, every lie you told. I have it all. David's shoulders sagged, his eyes darting between me and the folder. Emily hissed, she's bluffing. I leaned forward, my voice sharp as a blade. Try me. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing across the windows, illuminating their faces. David's pale with fear, Emily's twisted with hatred. In that light I saw the truth laid bare. They were willing to erase me for money, for power, for the illusion of control. But they forgot one thing. I was still Maggie Lawson. I was still the detective who never lost a fight. The confrontation ended with them storming out, the door slamming behind them. But I knew it wasn't over. They had crossed the line from manipulation to murder. The proof was in my hands now, undeniable, irrefutable. I sat alone at the table, revolver by my side, folder open before me, and let the storm wash over the house. My heart ached with grief, but beneath the grief burned a fire of resolve. They wanted me gone. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not until the truth was dragged into the light. Not until justice was served. And this time, justice wouldn't be for a stranger. It would be for me. The next morning, I didn't wake to birdsong or the quiet hum of my coffee maker. I woke to the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a stone. The storm had passed outside, but inside me, the thunder still roared. I dressed slowly, deliberately, sliding the folder of evidence into my bag. The revolver remained tucked under my coat. If last night taught me anything, it was that the danger had crossed the threshold of speculation. It was real, breathing in my house. I called Detective Robert Hayes. His voice, weary but steady, came through the line. "Maggie? You sound shaken." "Meet me," I told him. "Today, no delays." We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the smell of grease clung to the walls and conversations were swallowed by the clatter of dishes. Robert slid into the booth across from me, his eyes scanning my face, searching for answers. I placed the folder between us. "It's all here. The forged deeds, the bank withdrawals, and last night my son brought a killer into my home, a hired gun. If I hadn't been ready, I wouldn't be sitting here." He opened the folder, flipping through the papers. His brows furrowed deeper with each page. "Jesus, Maggie," he muttered. "This isn't just fraud. This is attempted murder." I sipped my coffee, my hands steady though my insides twisted. "I want you to arrest them." Robert hesitated. "With this evidence, I can open a formal investigation. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. They're your family. You'll be dragged into court of testimony. You'll have to face them head on." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I've faced worse, but this time I won't let blood blind me." By the time I left the diner, the weight of secrecy was gone. The decision was made. It was time to confront them, not just as a mother, but as the detective I had always been. That evening, I returned home to find David and Emily waiting in the living room. Their expressions told me they knew the tide had shifted. Emily stood tall, her arms crossed, while David sat slouched on the couch, eyes darting nervously. "You went to the police," Emily said flatly. I dropped my bag on the table, unzipped it, and laid the empty folder in plain view. "I did more than that. I gave them everything. Your forged signatures, your withdrawals, your little meeting with Victor." David's face paled. "Mom, why?" "Why?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Because you tried to kill me. Because you betrayed the woman who raised you, who bled for you, who sacrificed everything so you could have a future." Emily laughed softly, though her eyes blazed with fury. "Do you really think this will stick? Paperwork? Bank slips? Without a witness, it's just your word against ours. And who's going to believe a 75-year-old widow over her successful son and his wife?" I leaned forward, my voice a low growl. "A jury, a judge, and every neighbour who's seen you slithering around this house, watching me like vultures." David buried his face in his hands. "Emily, stop." "No," she snapped. "She's bluffing. She doesn't have enough." I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and set it on the table. "I recorded last night. Every word, every threat, Victor's voice, yours too. I have it all." The room went still. Emily's confidence cracked, her face twisting with shock. David's shoulders sagged as if the weight of his sins had finally crushed him. "You set us up," Emily hissed. "No," I said, my voice icy. "You set yourselves up. I just turned on the light." The confrontation spiraled, voices rising, anger spilling like venom. Emily lunged for the phone, but I was faster. I grabbed it and held it high, my revolver in the other hand. "Don't test me," I warned. "I may be old, but I still know how to pull a trigger." For a moment, the three of us stood in a tableau of hatred and grief. Emily's rage, David's despair, and my resolve collided in the silence. Finally, David broke. His voice cracked, raw. "Mom, I didn't want this. I swear, I was drowning. The debts, the pressure. I didn't see another way. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't lower the gun. You had every way, David. You had me. All you had to do was ask. But instead, you chose betrayal. You chose blood." Emily sneered. "He's weak. I told him this was the only way." "You wouldn't let go, Maggie. You clung to everything, made it impossible for us to move forward. If you just signed the papers..." "If I'd just died quietly, you mean?" I snapped. Her silence was answer enough. The door burst open then, Detective Hayes stepping in with 2 uniformed officers. I had left the latch undone, as we had arranged. He raised his badge. "David Lawson, Emily Lawson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder." Emily's face drained of colour. David didn't move, didn't speak. He simply looked at me, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped. As the officers cuffed them, Emily spat venom at me. "You think you've won? You think anyone will thank you for destroying your own family?" I stared at her, my heart breaking, but my resolve unshaken. "I didn't destroy my family. You did." They were led out into the night, sirens flashing red and blue across the walls of my home. I stood alone in the silence, my revolver still warm in my hand, the echoes of their betrayal lingering like smoke. The truth was finally out, undeniable, but the victory felt hollow. I had won the battle, but I had lost my son. And though justice had been served, the question of whether forgiveness was possible would haunt me forever. For now, all I had was the evidence, the silence of an empty house, and the ache of a mother who had faced the unthinkable and survived. The house was silent after they were taken away, but silence can be its own kind of torment. I sat at the kitchen table, the revolver resting beside my coffee cup, the folder of evidence spread out like the ashes of a fire. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of holding everything together for so long. I had won the confrontation, yes, but victories like this don't feel like triumph, they feel like funerals. I told myself I should be relieved. The threat was gone, at least for now. Yet in the quiet, grief seeped in like water through cracks. My son, my David, was behind bars because I had put him there. Emily I could hate without effort, but David, the little boy who once carried his lunchbox with pride, who ran into my arms after school, who cried into my shoulder the night his father died, how do you reconcile that child with the man who had tried to erase you? But grief could not be my master. Not now. The fight wasn't over. Robert Hayes had warned me. Cases like this twist in courtrooms, with lawyers who turn villains into victims and mothers into unreliable narrators. I knew I couldn't rest. I had to prepare. So I did what I had always done in the face of danger. I built a plan. I began cataloguing every detail, every interaction, every word they had spoken in those final days. I organised the evidence with the precision of a detective preparing for trial. Audio recordings, financial ledgers, the forged documents, even the napkin with Victor's name. I spoke with Sarah, my neighbour, who agreed to testify about Emily's strange behaviour, the late-night visitors, the arguments that spilled into the yard. Piece by piece, I built a fortress of truth. Still, doubt lingered. What if David turned on me completely in court? What if he claimed I was delusional, that age had muddled my mind? I knew Emily would play that card. She had hinted at it already. Who would believe a 75-year-old widow, she'd sneered. I wouldn't let them twist me into a caricature of weakness. So I steeled myself. I polished the revolver, not because I planned to use it, but because the ritual steadied me. I rehearsed my testimony in the mirror, speaking with the voice of the detective I once was, firm, clear, undeniable. Days later, I received a letter from David. It came through his lawyer, neatly typed, formal. He begged me to drop the charges, claimed he had been manipulated, claimed Emily had poisoned his mind. He wrote of debts, of shame, of desperation. He ended with, "I'm still your son. Don't let this be the end of us." I read it 3 times, searching for sincerity in the sterile lines. Perhaps some of it was true. Perhaps Emily had been the spark, but sparks don't burn houses alone. They need kindling, and David had offered plenty. My heart ached, but I folded the letter and placed it into the evidence folder. Whatever sympathy lingered had no place in a courtroom. The first pre-trial hearing was brutal. Emily came dressed in white, her hair tied back, her face painted with sorrow. She clutched David's hand, playing the role of devoted wife. Their lawyer painted me as bitter, paranoid, confused by age and grief. He argued that the financial transfers were family arrangements, that the property drafts were misunderstood paperwork, that the recording was taken out of context. But when Robert Hayes took the stand, when he laid out the evidence with the authority of the badge, the tide shifted. The judge's eyes narrowed at the mention of Victor Ramirez, at the forged signature, at the guardianship petition filed without my knowledge. For the first time, I saw cracks in Emily's mask. That night, I sat by my window, watching the streetlights flicker. I thought of the hundreds of victims I'd once stood for in courtrooms, the mothers who had wept, the children who had testified. I had always believed justice was worth the pain it demanded. Now I was the one paying the price. But there was something else too, something fierce that sparked inside me. For the first time since retirement, I felt the fire of purpose. They had tried to make me small, to erase me, to reduce me to a signature on a deed. Instead, they had reminded me who I was. Mae Wilson. Detective, fighter, survivor. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with my head high, evidence in my bag, resolve in my chest. Emily glanced at me from across the room, her eyes sharp, her smile thin. David avoided my gaze, his shoulders hunched as if he carried the weight of 1,000 lies. When the judge asked if I was prepared to testify, my answer was steady, unwavering. Yes, Your Honour. I was not just a witness. I was the case, the living proof that even blood cannot silence truth. And as I spoke about the whispers, the forged documents, the hired gun, the night I stared down the barrel of my son's betrayal, I felt the courtroom listening, not to an old woman, not to a frail widow, but to a detective who refused to be erased. The trial loomed ahead, long and uncertain. But I no longer trembled. I had confronted killers before. Now I would confront the hardest one of all, the killer that greed had made out of my own family. When I left the courthouse that day, the sky was clear, the air sharp with autumn. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with something close to freedom. The fight was far from over, but I was ready. They had tried to take everything from me. Instead, they had given me back my fire, and I would not let it die, not until justice had the final word. The first sign that danger wasn't finished me came not from a lawyer or a courtroom, but from the shadows outside my window. It was 2 weeks after the pre-trial hearing. I had begun to believe the worst was behind me, that David and Emily were contained within the walls of the system. But predators don't surrender easily. They claw, they adapt, they reach from the dark, even when caged. I was reading by the lamplight in my bedroom when I noticed the curtain shift. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I caught the glint of eyes staring in, unblinking. I snapped the curtain back, revolver in hand, but the figure was gone before I could focus. My pulse hammered, old instincts screaming that the threat was real. The next morning, Dr. Sarah knocked on my door. She looked unsettled, her usual calm replaced by urgency. "Maggie," she said, lowering her voice, "I saw someone lurking near your yard last night." A man, broad-shouldered, with a cap pulled low. I called out, but he disappeared into the alley. Victor. The name thudded in my mind like a warning bell. I thought he had walked away from the deal, disgusted or unwilling, but killers don't vanish. They wait for the right price. And if Emily still had strings to pull, or contacts willing to pull them for her, I knew I wasn't safe yet. Later that week, the evidence became undeniable. Returning from the grocery store, I found the back door ajar, though I had locked it. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered, cupboards disturbed. Whoever had entered hadn't stolen valuables. They had searched. For what? The recordings? The evidence? Me? Robert Hayes came immediately when I called. He walked the perimeter, his expression grim. "They're not done," he said. "Whether it's Victor or someone else, someone's pushing to silence you before trial. You need protection." "Protection?" I scoffed. "I was the protection once." His eyes softened. "You still are. But even you can't fight shadows alone." That night, the storm of memories returned. I lay in bed, clutching the revolver, listening for footsteps, watching the door for movement. I dreamed of my husband's voice telling me to stay strong, dreamed of David as a boy crying for help, dreamed of Emily's cold smile whispering, "You won't last forever." At dawn, I made a decision. I refused to wait for death to knock again. If they were escalating, so would I. I began setting traps, a small camera hidden by the porch light, motion sensors by the back door. I logged every detail with the precision of my old case files. And when Sarah stopped by with a thermos of soup, I confided in her. "If something happens to me," I told her, sliding a sealed envelope into her hands, "take this to Hayes. Everything is inside, the recordings, the ledger, the proof." She hesitated, eyes wet. "Maggie, don't talk like that." "I have to," I said, "because they won't stop. And if they get to me, someone has to finish this." The escalation came sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, I woke to the crunch of gravel outside. My heart leapt, and I reached for the revolver. The sound of the back door rattling followed, the unmistakable scrape of tools against a lock. I moved silently through the hallway, my feet remembering every creak of the floorboards to avoid. From the kitchen doorway, I saw him. Victor, his shoulders hunched, his hands steady as he worked the lock. I levelled the revolver, my voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Step away from the door, Ramirez." He froze, turning slowly. His smirk returned as if we were old acquaintances. "You've got spirit, lady, but you can't watch your back forever." "Maybe not," I replied, "but tonight isn't your night." The red-blue flash of patrol car lights lit up the yard behind him. Hayes had been watching, stationed nearby at my request. Officers swarmed, shouting commands. Victor cursed, raising his hands as they dragged him away. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he spat one last line at me. "You think locking me up will save you? They've already paid. There's always someone else willing to finish the job." The words sank deep, colder than the night air. Always someone else. Always another threat. When the yard was quiet again, Hayes approached me. "You were right," he said softly. "This goes deeper than just desperation. Someone's funding this. Someone's pulling the strings." I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of it. Emily's face rose in my mind, her voice dripping with venom. She was behind bars, but her reach hadn't ended. She had lit the fuse, and now the fire spread through hands like Victor's. The battle wasn't finished. It had only changed shape. And as I stood in the doorway of my home, watching the flashing lights fade into the night, I understood. Survival wasn't just about holding on anymore. It was about fighting back. Louder, harder, sharper than before. I wasn't just a mother betrayed. I was a detective once again. And the hunt had begun. The night Victor was hauled away, I thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare would begin to settle. But predators rarely act alone, and betrayal never travels in a straight line. Days after his arrest, I received word from Hayes. Someone had posted Victor's bail in cash. Untraceable. He was back on the streets within 48 hours. The revelation burned like acid in my veins. "Who would risk money on him?" I asked. Hayes only shook his head. Someone with motive. Someone close. That someone could only be Emily. Even locked in a cell, she had allies, lawyers, friends, business partners. And the thought of her pulling strings from behind bars chilled me. It meant the war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about endurance. But fate has a way of tipping the scales when you least expect it. A week later, Sarah appeared at my doorstep with an envelope. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. "The mailman delivered this to me by mistake," she said. "It has Emily's name, but the return address is a law firm. I thought you should see." Inside was a copy of a will, my husband's will. My heart stopped as I scanned the pages. It wasn't the version I had tucked away years ago. This one had been altered, forged, naming David as the sole heir, cutting me out entirely. The truth hit like lightning. They hadn't just plotted to kill me. They had been rewriting my past, erasing my name from every legal line, planning to strip me of identity as much as property. This was bigger than greed. It was annihilation. I brought the will to Hayes, who leaned back in his chair as he read. "This is it," he said grimly. "The smoking gun. With this forgery tied to the financials and Victor's testimony, if we can flip him, you'll bury their defense." But the twist was sharper than even I expected. 2 days later, Hayes called me in. Victor had confessed during interrogation. Not out of remorse, but out of bitterness. He admitted Emily had arranged the payment, yes, but he added a detail that shook me to my core. "It wasn't just her," Victor said. "The son, David, he was the one who came to me first. Said he wanted it done quick, no mess. She just handled the money, but it was his idea, his order." Hayes repeated the words slowly, watching my face. "Your son wasn't just complicit. He orchestrated it." For a moment the room tilted. I had braced myself for Emily's venom, for her greed and malice. But David, my David, being the architect, the true hand behind the betrayal, that truth cut deeper than any wound. I remembered the letter he had sent me, the plea that painted him as a victim of manipulation, lies. Every word was poison disguised as apology. The ledger of my pain grew heavier. My son wasn't dragged into darkness. He had walked into it willingly, carrying the torch. I sat in silence for a long time, the revolver heavy in my coat pocket. Finally, I whispered, "Then I will face him in court, and this time I won't see a son, I'll see a criminal." Hayes nodded, though his eyes softened. "It's the only way forward, Maggie. Justice isn't about who they are to you, it's about what they've done." The trial loomed closer, but the twist had armed me with something stronger than evidence. It armed me with resolve. Emily could no longer be the scapegoat. The mask was gone. David's face stood at the centre of the crime, bare and undeniable. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I pulled out the old family album. Page after page of David as a boy stared back at me, smiling, laughing, arms wrapped around my neck. I let myself cry then, tears I had held back for too long. Not because I doubted my path, but because love and betrayal can exist in the same heart, tearing it in two. When the tears dried, I closed the album and locked it away. The mother in me would always mourn. But the detective in me had taken command. The game had changed. I wasn't preparing to fight Emily anymore. I was preparing to expose David, the son I once believed was my greatest legacy, as the architect of my destruction. And as painful as it was, the clarity gave me strength, because now the truth was no longer tangled. The enemy was no longer hiding. The enemy had my son's face, and I was ready to take him down. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its walls echoing with the weight of judgment. I sat at the witness stand, my hands folded neatly before me, the file of evidence resting on the table like a shield. The judge's gavel struck, and the trial of David Lawson and Emily Carter Lawson began. Emily entered first, dressed in pale grey, her expression moulded into sorrow. She clutched a handkerchief as if she were the victim of some cruel twist of fate. David followed, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked older than his 45 years, worn down by lies and debts. But none of that excused the truth I carried. The prosecution opened with Victor Ramirez's testimony. His voice was flat, almost bored, as he recounted the deal. The son came to me first, said he wanted it done quick. The wife handled the cash. His words dropped like stones into the silence of the court. Emily's face tightened. David flinched, and a murmur rippled through the gallery. Then came the evidence. The forged deed, the altered will, the bank withdrawals, all laid bare before the judge. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of their defence. I watched David's face as the prosecutor held up the napkin with Victor's name scrawled across it. His lips trembled, his eyes darted toward me, but I refused to look away. When it was my turn to testify, I stood tall. My voice did not waver. I told the court about the whispers, the veiled threats, the night Victor stood in my kitchen with a gun. I spoke of Emily's cold words, David's desperate demands, the betrayal that hollowed out my home. At one point, Emily's lawyer tried to interrupt, claiming I was exaggerating, that age had clouded my memory. I turned my gaze on him, sharp as the detective I once was. I spent 30 years documenting evidence in homicide cases, I said. Do you think I forgot how to recognize the truth? The room fell silent. Even the lawyer's voice faltered. The trial stretched on for hours, but by the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge leaned forward, his face grave. The court finds both defendants guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder. His gavel struck, and the sound reverberated through me like thunder. Emily's mask shattered at last. She screamed, protesting, calling me a liar, a bitter old woman. Officers restrained her as she struggled, her voice cracking with rage. David, in contrast, sat motionless, his face pale, his eyes empty. I thought I might feel triumph, but what I felt instead was a hollow ache. Justice had been served, yes, they were guilty, and the law had spoken, but nothing in the world could erase the truth that my son had tried to end me, that the child I once carried in my arms had become my greatest enemy. As the courtroom emptied, Robert Hayes placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Maggie. You won. I nodded, though victory felt more like survival than triumph. Justice isn't winning, Robert, I whispered. It's the price we pay to live with what's been lost. I gathered my folder, my revolver resting in my purse, and walked out of the courthouse into the sharp air of a new morning. The verdict was final, but my story, my life, was far from over. The trial was over, the verdict sealed, but the echoes of it followed me home like shadows that refused to leave. The house stood quiet, the same walls that had once been filled with laughter, now haunted by memories of betrayal. I set my bag down on the table, ran my fingers across the wood, and felt the weight of both victory and loss. Neighbours stopped by in the days that followed. Some brought flowers, others casseroles, their faces full of sympathy. They congratulated me for being brave, for standing firm. But when the door closed and silence returned, the truth pressed in. Bravery doesn't erase loneliness. Justice doesn't mend a broken family. At night, I would sit by the window with the revolver resting on the sill, watching the streetlights flicker. The same question gnawed at me, relentless as the ticking clock. What now? I had survived. Yes, I had even won. But what does a mother do when survival means outliving her own child's love? One evening, Sarah came by with tea. She sat across from me, her voice gentle. You could start over, Maggie. Sell the house, move closer to friends, maybe even travel. You've earned peace. Peace. The word sounded foreign, almost unreal. Could peace exist after such a war? Could I find it in new places, or would it forever elude me, bound to the scars of what had been lost? I looked around the room, the photos of David as a boy, my husband's old chair, the medals tucked into drawers. This house was both sanctuary and prison, a monument to love and betrayal alike. To leave it would be to abandon the memories of who I had been. To stay would mean living among ghosts. Some nights I imagined forgiveness, wondered if one day I could sit across from David, look him in the eye and let go of the anger. Other nights, the thought of forgiveness felt like weakness, like letting the knife twist deeper. The debate raged inside me, unresolved. But life has a way of demanding decisions, even when we're not ready. A letter arrived from the prison, David's handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside, he wrote not of innocence, not of excuses, but of regret. He said he wished he could undo the choices, that he missed the boy he used to be, the mother I once was. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, placing it in the drawer beside my bed. I couldn't decide if it was truth or manipulation. Perhaps it was both. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, I whispered into the darkness, "Do I forgive you, David? Or do I let the fire of betrayal burn forever?" No answer came, only silence. And maybe that is how my story must end, not with resolution, but with the question left open, raw and alive. Because forgiveness and vengeance are two sides of the same coin, and I was still holding it, turning it over in my hand, unable to choose. The world will debate what I should do. Some will say forgive, others will demand vengeance. But the truth is, only I can decide, and I haven't, at least not yet. For now I remain here in this house, breathing, surviving, waiting. Not a victim, not yet a forgiver, but something in between. A mother, a detective, a survivor of her own blood. If you followed my story to this point, you know the truth. Survival isn't always victory, and justice doesn't heal every wound. My son and his wife sit behind bars, their schemes laid bare, their greed exposed. Yet here I am, still in the same house, surrounded by the ghosts of laughter and betrayal, wondering what it all truly means. I am Margaret Lawson, Maggie to those who remember me as a detective, as a mother, as a woman who refused to be erased. I faced killers, liars, and predators of every kind, but nothing has cut me deeper than knowing the blood of my own flesh was willing to spill mine. And so I leave you with the question that still burns in my heart. If it were you, if the people you loved most tried to end your life, would you forgive them? Or would you let vengeance define your final years? There is no easy answer. Perhaps forgiveness is strength. Perhaps vengeance is survival. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. What I know is this: I chose to fight. I chose to survive. And I will keep choosing day after day until the end. Now I turn to you. What would you do? Would you open the door to forgiveness, or would you lock it forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you believe truth must always prevail. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories that cut to the bone, stories that challenge what you'd do if life ever pushed you this far. This was my fight for survival. The next story could be yours.